There are tons of books, articles, and yes, YouTube videos about gender stereotypes in Disney films, including their soundtracks. We all know about Snow White's domestic yearning and Gaston's braggadocio, but those are communicated explicitly in the lyrics, not the instrumental part. Stereotypes of the Orient are also ever present in music. One of the most famous is the so-called Oriental riff, heard in everything from the Aristocats
Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Fuyang. Fortune cookie always wrong.
to the Vapors turning Japanese. Another set of stereotypes has floated around for centuries, especially in America. The equation of the Asian with the feminine. Part of this relationship has its origins in racist legislation put in place to ward against Chinese immigrating to America in the 19th century. In addition to being forced into essential slave labor working on the railroad, the government barred Chinese immigrants from owning most types of establishments. That's why there's the association between Asian people, dry cleaners, and beauty salons today.
You stop make bing bong. Every bing bong 2 cents.
How do you get shirts so clean, Mr. Lee?
Ancient Chinese secret.
This connection is mostly feminized men because they are the ones mainly running these businesses. For women, these stereotypes usually take the form of the up-for-grabs geisha, also called the China doll stereotype, and the domineering dragon lady.
And nothing but hair lies.
Although these depictions are still popular today, they have their roots in colonialism that's lasted for hundreds of years.
The price you pay for bringing up either my Chinese or American heritage as a negative is, I collect your fucking head.
For example, after Japan stopped having its borders be closed in the mid-19th century, there was wide dissemination of Japanese cultural products. Europeans became fascinated with this new exotic art, which became the movement Japanism. From art to furniture to opera, they appropriated it all. And it's the last item that brings us to the beginning of our story, Madama Butterfly. If you know anything about opera, you know about this one. This selection by Puccini is the 7th most performed opera from 1996 to 2020. A brief synopsis for the uninitiated. B.F. Pinkerton is a lieutenant in the U.S. Navy stationed in Nagasaki. Chocho-san, Chocho meaning butterfly in Japanese, is enamored with Pinkerton's Americanness, even converting to Christianity for him. The two are destined to marry. Although Butterfly knows that Pinkerton is to leave soon for a stint back in the States, little does she know that Pinkerton is marrying her for a wham bam thank you ma'am situation thanks to lax Japanese marriage laws. After 3 years, Butterfly still pines away for her true love, despite the warnings of everyone around. Pinkerton then comes in tow with his swanky new white American wife Kate, intending to raise the child that Pinkerton so graciously left Butterfly with to take care of in his formative years. Short-sighted Pinkerton didn't realize the value of commitment all those 3 years ago, and becomes frightened with the idea of delivering the news to his still faithful and smitten Butterfly. After being informed by the same people who had been warning her for all this time, she decides the only way out is seppuku. The last scene displays Pinkerton seemingly and somewhat confusingly full of regret, holding Butterfly's corpse while Sing shouting her name. As you can probably guess, it's an extremely problematic opera by today's standards, nonetheless still performed all over the world, all the time. So let's take a closer look at its score. Puccini, not immune to the rampant Japanism at the time, was inspired by multiple Japanese melodies. By the turn of the century, there were already books that documented Japanese melodies in Western notation, one of which was Nippon Gakufu series by Rudolf Dietrich. Dietrich was an Austrian musician who worked in Japan during the Meiji period, after Japan had been urged open by the Americans. He was in high demand as a teacher of the Western musical tradition for the Japanese people. During his 6-year stint in Japan, as a director of the newly formed Tokyo School of Music, he picked up a thing or two about the language and melodies. Thinking that similarly Orient-starved Westerners would enjoy some oral Asian fusion, he decided to release a collection of Japanese melodies. A student of the Vienna Conservatory, he applied contemporary Viennese harmony to make it palatable to the average white listener, resulting in Nippon Gakufu 1 and 2, colorfully translating to Japanese sheet music. In total, they contain 16 songs. Puccini used 7 of those in Butterfly. For my research, I went through the instances marked by the incredibly helpful chart on daisyfield.com. I used my judgment to determine if the average audience member could detect if the composer created the music to sound Japanese. Of course, this process was subjective. I invite the viewer to view the timecodes I used for my research and make their own assessment. But in general, the melodies I chose are often highlighted by a change in instrumentation. The texture tends to thin out and emphasize these melodies. In other words, fewer instruments play with the theme standing out. The excerpts I chose stick out, as opera is known for being thick and lush. Some argue that the gakufu melodies appear in other spots, but they are often hidden by other voices and get lost in all that's going on. After going through the chart, I came up with 16 examples that featured the gakufu melodies. I then coded for the overall gender of the scene and the race and gender of the speaker. Regarding subjectivity, rating the gender of a scene is a doozy, so let me explain my methodology. I use traditional gender role standards in my coding, note ones that I do not agree with. For instance, I code exerting power and control as masculine. Furthermore, I code traits like submissiveness and topics like marriage and housekeeping as feminine. Finally, there are some scenes in which characters blatantly gender the scene using words like men, women, masculinity, and femininity. Let's take a look at some scenes in which the speaker's gender matches the scene's gender. We've got plenty to choose from for women. Quantitatively speaking, out of the 16 scenes I coded, 8 out of the 10 gendered ones were feminine coded. One of the most obvious ones occurs in Act 1. Butterfly is laying out some of her possessions to her soon-to-be husband Pinkerton. Butterfly refers to her objects as women's things. Furthermore, Pinkerton establishes his dominance in this interaction by not only implicating Butterfly to discard her rouge for some reason, but also by his stance. Notice how he towers above her seiza sitting position, emphasized by the cinematography in this film edition. In the background, there are 2 discernible melodies, Ha Uta and Sakura. Another example is the marriage between Butterfly and Pinkerton. O Edo Nihonbashi is played in the background until the chorus of women behind her join in. Butterfly then simply states, subsuming her name and her authority to her new husband. For those keeping score at home, 2 of the 10 gendered scenes I coded were deemed masculine. In Butterfly, masculinity usually takes the musical form in either the melody The Star-Spangled Banner or Kimi ga yo. Yes, the beloved English-composed American-adopted anthem is used multiple times in Butterfly. A couple of times it is used in a rather neutral way to reference America. However, the Star-Spangled Banner is used to assert a type of masculine dominance. The most repulsive instance is when Pinkerton is confiding in his plans to marry Butterfly and scamper off back to America to marry another woman. You could cut the chauvinism here with a knife. Depictions of Japanese men in a separate but equal situation use the Kimi ga yo, the official anthem of Japan. It's a contentious piece of music in contemporary Japanese society, as it has strong connotations to the Empire of Japan. Individuals, especially educators who have protested the anthem, have been reprimanded, for instance, uncovering the authoritarian implications of the piece. It's no wonder that this piece is used in Butterfly to enhance the power of governmental actors, all of which, of course, are men. It's worth mentioning that not all instances of Japanese melodies in Madama Butterfly are gendered. In fact, out of the 16 cases I coded, 6 I deemed gender neutral. These were instances where characters were just stating facts, or that had no dialogue or clearly gendered behavior occurring. However, in the 4 gender-neutral scenes that did not have both men and women speaking, women were the speakers 3 out of these 4 times. This tendency reinforces a link between the Japanese melodies and femininity. That is, even in those instances where nothing is gendered in the scene, the speakers are still women, reinforcing the implicit feminine gendering that we do to many Asian or Asian-inspired works today. Speaking of contemporary works, I know why you're really here. Hell, it's one of the reasons I'm here. The live-action version of the film's arrival lit a fire under my ass to put this prior research of mine into video essay format. Sadly, this version of the film is song-free, so we'll be relying on the 1998 Disney animated version. For those who've been living under a rock, I'll give a summary of the animated version, which deviates markedly from the original Ballad of Mulan that was initially transcribed in the 6th century. Spoiler, the Disney version removes a lot of the progressive parts. The Huns invade China via the Great Wall, and the Emperor conscripts one man from every family. Fearful of her father's failing health, Mulan disguises herself as a man to find his place. After being painfully socialized into the ways of masculinity during training camp, she becomes a leader in her infantry. Her interestingly African-American vernacular English-speaking dragon sidekick Mushu creates a fake order that he lies has come from the father, the leader of the infantry, Mulan's love interest, and most crushed-on Asian man of the millennial generation, Li Shang, reinforcing that men and women just can't be friends or even co-workers. All Mushu wanted was to see his Mulan in action, kicking Hun ass. Unfortunately, when they arrive at their destination, they discover that Shang's father, along with his army, has been eliminated by the Huns. Turns out they weren't finished either, as the Huns ambush Shang's army too. Mulan buries the Huns in an avalanche, at least to our knowledge. But Shen Yu, the leader of the Huns, cuts her chest in the process. This of course exposes her womanhood. However, Shang, being the progressive benevolent person he is, doesn't execute this woman as he should. He instead expels her to the freezing mountains. However, little does Shang's army know that many in Shen Yu's gang are still alive and kicking. Mulan does, however. As Shang and Co arrive in the Imperial City to spread the gospel of Hun's defeat, the Huns do too. Hilarity ensues, and long story short, Mulan saves the day in feats of badassery. Despite getting honored and requested by the Emperor for her bravery, Mulan decides to follow her gender role instead and return home. Shang follows suit and confirms conventional romance tropes in the process. Spoiler, they get married in the direct-to-video sequel. Within Mulan, we will be discussing the songs. The instrumental aspects of the score use elements from both Chinese and Western film scoring traditions, but because we're comparing Mulan to an opera, it makes sense to compare it to the pieces with lyrics. Plus, the songs are the most memorable aspect of the film anyway. The methodology for Mulan I used is essentially the same as Butterflies. More specifically, gender will be assigned using the same criteria. The main difference is that I will, again, focus on the songs rather than the entire soundtrack. In the film, there's a simple trend that appears. The more feminine the scene is, the more Chinese it sounds. The melody for the first song in the film, Honor to Us All, is mostly pentatonic. A little explanation for the uninitiated. The pentatonic scale, both major and minor, is a 5-note scale that is often associated with Asian countries.
And even you can't blow it. Ancestors, hear my plea. Help me not to make a fool of me.
The truth is that cultures all around the world use this scale. 2 5-note scales do not nearly account for the variation of Asian music, but a la the Asian riff I mentioned earlier, the pentatonic scale is nonetheless often used as a musical signifier of Asia. Therefore, the melody, along with its instrumentation of Chinese-sounding instruments like the dizi and guzheng, clearly establish it as a Chinese-sounding song, at least to the ears of Western listeners. The content of the song pertains to how to be an ideal wife, much to the chagrin of Mulan. The women taking care of Mulan explicitly state as such, but they also use evocative imagery, intending to turn Mulan into a silk purse and designing her to exhibit good breeding capabilities along with a tiny waist. Not a lot left to the imagination here in terms of gendering. Reflection is a little more interesting. Though the song pits Mulan against becoming soul marriage material, it also deals with wanting to be oneself, which leans towards the more feminine side. It's a mix of Western and Chinese musical elements. The chorus is textbook ballad material, using the Western heptatonic scale, the scale used in most pop music. However, it also utilizes Chinese instruments and sprinkles in the pentatonic scale for some Asian flavor. The decision not to use the pentatonic scale prominently in the melody was a deliberate choice by the composers because they intended to popularize the song. Matthew Wilder, Mulan's composer, quote, knew they weren't going to be writing a 5-tone scale musical. His go-to references were Rodgers and Hammerstein and Lerner and Lowe and Gilbert and Sullivan. Rodgers and Hammerstein-esque musicals are much more palatable for white audiences, and pentatonic melodies don't do well in the American pop circuit, save for the millennial whoop. It's likely one of the reasons why I'll Make a Man Out of You became popular too. Arguably the most popular song from Mulan, it extols the supposed virtues of masculinity, that being confidence, strength, and militarism, and has interestingly become somewhat of a feminist anthem inside and outside the film. Wilder again agrees, stating, it needed to be masculine and muscular, and hence the drums, all the military aspects, using his very extensive Asian sample library to create a Chinese marching American band. Without Wilder saying so, I would have never been able to confirm that there were Chinese instruments in this track. The drums could easily be Western percussion, for example. Despite the composer's international marching band fantasies, I have to disagree and hold that the orchestration sounds non-Asian. David Zippel, Mulan's lyricist, said regarding his depictions of masculinity that he intended it to be ironic and humorous and in character at all times, adding it's about hypermasculinity and the whole idea of Mulan punctures that idea. Zippel's first comment accurately portrays the film's effect. Regardless, it's clear that the song is representing, satirizing, or both, depictions of masculinity and hypermasculinity. And what does Wilder use to depict this? A big, fat Western orchestral sound, devoid of the light, sparse, cute pentatonic melodies that adorn both Honor to Us All and A Girl Worth Fighting For, from which any irony intended towards the instrumentation is lost. Yes, the final song in Mulan also contains these pretty pentatonics in the melody. We've got the DZ, the China symbol, its Western name, the ratchet for some reason, and what is this supposed Chinese flavored music tied to? Well, these men want her
My girl will marvel at my strength, adore my battle scars.
I couldn't care less what she'll wear or what she looks like. It all depends on what she cooks like. Beef, pork, chicken.
Some may argue that this song, like I'll Make a Man Out of You, is meant to be satirical. Even if we assume that's true, and that the audience reads it as such, the satire is not on a musical level, similar to I'll Make a Man Out of You. Some would understand the supposed satire on gender and gender roles, but general audiences don't have enough musical education to discern these melodic differences. Western audiences in particular are not educated in what Chinese music is supposed to sound like. Thus, masculinity and femininity are still attached to the musical elements in the film, even if during the song gender is satirized.
Speaks her mind?
The connection of the Asian with the feminine has stretched across centuries, from turn-of-the-century Europe to the 21st century's adaptation of Mulan. This project barely scratched the surface of ways our media reinforces stereotypes, from those targeting gender to those targeting Asians and Asian Americans. Within music, one of its subsets we tend to overlook are those involving compositional and instrumental choices. They are a more pernicious vehicle for transmitting values, as not many people are aware of how to catch them.